Salim had imagined many ways of returning home after winning the lottery, but never like this. He did not find his parents waiting at the doorway with laughter or tears. He found them behind the family house, in a collapsing cowshed, sleeping on torn sacks beside frightened animals. His mother's wrapper was stiff with dirt. His father would not lift his eyes. Inside the real house, strangers were cooking, talking, living as if they belonged there. And when Salim asked the village what had happened, silence spread faster than smoke, as though everyone had agreed his parents were no longer human enough to deserve an answer. If you're watching, tell me your country and your local time in the comments. And if stories of justice, healing, and hope speak to your heart, subscribe and stay with us. Before the money, before the shock, before the silence that would greet him like a wound that refused to close, Salim Kamau lived a life that most people would not notice, even if they passed him every day. In Nairobi, he was just another young man moving through crowded streets before sunrise, carrying more responsibility than his thin frame seemed built to hold. He worked wherever he could find something honest enough to keep him going. Some days he loaded sacks of rice at the market until his back burned like fire. Other days he rode borrowed motorcycles to deliver packages across the city, weaving through traffic and dust, chasing time for people who barely looked at his face. When there was nothing else, he stood outside construction sites waiting for someone to point and say, "You come!" He never refused work. Hunger had taught him that pride could not feed a man. But every evening, no matter how tired his bones felt, Salim would sit quietly on the edge of his narrow bed in a shared room and count what remained of his earnings. He would separate the money into small piles, pressing each note flat with careful fingers. One pile was for rent, one for food, one for emergencies he prayed would never come, and one, always the smallest but the most important, was for home, for Baba Juma, for Mama Zawadi. Their village lay far from Nairobi, beyond paved roads and loud cities where the land stretched quietly and life moved at a slower, heavier rhythm. They were not beggars, not broken people. They had always lived with dignity, even when that dignity came wrapped in worn clothes and empty pockets. Salim remembered his father's hands, thick and cracked from years of working the land, holding tools that had long outlived their strength. Baba Juma never spoke much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He believed in patience, in doing things the right way, even when the world did not reward it. Mama Zawadi was different. She laughed more easily, though life had given her many reasons not to. She had a way of turning small meals into something that felt like abundance, stretching what little they had until it could feed not just bodies but spirits too. Even when times were hardest, she would say, "We may be poor, but we are not empty." Those words stayed with Salim long after he left the village. He had promised them the day he boarded the crowded bus to Nairobi that he would return one day with something better. Not just money, but a life that would finally let them rest. At the time, it sounded like a dream, too big for a boy with nothing but determination and fear. Years passed, and that promise became heavier. Because no matter how hard Salim worked, it never felt like enough. There were months when he could send only a little. There were weeks when he sent nothing at all, choosing instead to survive so he could keep trying. Each time he called home, his mother would insist that they were fine. His father would say little, but the silence between his words told another story. Salim could hear it, the slow wearing down of hope. Still, he kept going. One evening after a long day at the market, Salim found himself sitting by a small roadside kiosk, drinking weak tea that barely carried flavor. The sky above Nairobi had begun to darken, the noise of the city settling into a tired hum. Around him, people talked, laughed, argued, lived their lives as if tomorrow was guaranteed. He watched them quietly. There was a man nearby, animated and loud, waving a small piece of paper in the air as he spoke to a group of friends. They laughed at first, but then leaned in, listening more closely. The word lottery floated through the airlight and unreal like something that belonged to other people. Salim almost ignored it. The lottery was not for people like him. It was a story others told themselves, a distant chance that rarely touched the lives of those who needed it most. But something about that moment stayed with him. Maybe it was the way the man spoke with certainty, as if the impossible could happen. Maybe it was the exhaustion pressing so deeply into Salim's bones that even a foolish idea felt worth touching for a second. Or maybe it was simply that he had run out of other things to believe in. Without thinking too much, Salim stood up, finished the last sip of his tea, and walked toward a small stand where faded posters promised dreams in bright colors that did not match the dusty street. The vendor barely looked at him. How many, the man asked. Salim hesitated. He reached into his pocket and felt the few coins he had left after setting aside money for rent and food. He should have walked away. Every coin mattered. Every small decision could mean the difference between eating and sleeping hungry. But then he thought of Mama Zawadi's voice. We may be poor, but we are not empty. Slowly, he placed the coins on the counter. One, he said. The vendor handed him a ticket without ceremony, without expectation, as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper. To the man behind the stand, it was just another sale in a long day. To Salim, it felt strange in his hand. Light, insignificant, almost foolish. He looked at the numbers printed across it, trying to feel something. Hope, excitement, anything that could justify the decision he had just made. But nothing came. He folded the ticket carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Life did not change in that moment. The city did not pause. The noise did not quiet. No sudden sign appeared to tell him that this small action would alter the course of everything he knew. Instead, Salim turned and walked back toward his room, already thinking about the next day's work, the next set of problems waiting for him. The next call he would make home, where he would pretend things were better than they were. The ticket stayed in his pocket, forgotten between long days and longer nights, until the day it didn't. Until the moment when everything he believed about his life, about struggle, about what was possible and what was not, would be forced to change. But, on that quiet evening in Nairobi, Salim was still just a young man with tired hands carrying a promise he did not yet know how to fulfill. And far away in a village that still felt like home, no matter how distant it became, his parents were waiting without knowing how much longer they could keep waiting. The numbers did not feel real at first. Salim had almost missed them entirely. It was a slow, dusty afternoon in Nairobi, the kind that made everything feel heavier than it should. The air hung thick in the room he shared with two other men, and the silence felt unusual without the usual noise of tired voices and restless movement. Salim had just returned from a long delivery run, his legs aching, his shirt damp with sweat, his hands still smelling faintly of petrol and dust. He dropped his small bag beside the bed and sat down, letting his body rest for a moment. His mind was already moving ahead, thinking about the next day, the next job, the next small amount of money he would try to stretch into something meaningful. Then he remembered the ticket. It had been sitting in his pocket for days, folded and forgotten between exhaustion and routine. He reached for it without expectation, pulling it out slowly as if it were nothing more than a habit. Outside the window, a radio was playing. The announcer's voice drifted in and out, carried by the dry wind listing numbers in a steady rhythm. Salim barely paid attention at first. The lottery was something distant, something that belonged to people who had time to dream. Still, he looked down at the paper in his hand. The first number matched. He frowned slightly, thinking he had read it wrong. He leaned closer, squinting at the faded print, then listened again to the radio. The second number matched. A small tension formed in his chest, unfamiliar and quiet. He shifted on the bed, suddenly more alert, his tiredness slipping away without warning. The third number. Now his breathing slowed. The room seemed to narrow around him, as if everything unnecessary had been pushed aside. The sounds outside faded into something distant, unimportant. The fourth number. His fingers tightened slightly around the ticket. This. No, he whispered under his breath. The fifth number. At this point, his hands were no longer steady. He checked the ticket again, carefully, deliberately, as though precision could undo what was happening. Each number stood exactly where it should. The final number came through the radio, like a quiet echo, and it matched. For a long moment, Salim did not move. He did not jump. He did not shout. He did not even smile. He simply sat there, the ticket in his hand, his mind refusing to follow what his eyes had already confirmed. This kind of thing did not happen to people like him. Life had taught him that clearly. Nothing came suddenly, nothing came easily, and nothing came without a cost. So he checked again. He read each number slowly, comparing them one by one, forcing himself to find a mistake. There was none. The paper in his hand had changed. It was no longer something small, something meaningless. It was something powerful. A door, opening without warning. Salim leaned back slightly, his gaze unfocused, his thoughts drifting far beyond the small room. Images began to surface: his mother's tired smile, his father's quiet strength, the worn walls of their home, the long days that had shaped all of them into people who endured rather than hoped. A strange weight settled in his chest. Not excitement, responsibility. "What does this mean?" he asked softly, though no one was there to answer. He had seen stories like this before, always from a distance. People who won money and lost themselves, families that broke under sudden wealth, friends who turned into strangers. He did not want that, not for himself, not for his parents. He stood up slowly and began to pace the small room, his thoughts sharpening as they moved. This was not just money. It was a chance to change something that had remained unchanged for too long. But it had to be done carefully. If people knew too soon, everything would shift. Expectations would rise. Trust would become uncertain, and what he wanted most, what truly mattered, could be lost in noise and attention. He stopped moving and looked down at the ticket again. His parents did not need a spectacle. They needed relief. They needed dignity. They needed peace. "I will go home," he said quietly. The words felt firm, grounded, not as a rich man returning to be seen, but as a son returning to restore. That decision brought a calm he had not expected. The confusion began to settle into purpose. He folded the ticket carefully and placed it inside a small cloth pouch he kept hidden among his belongings. From that moment, everything he did became intentional. Over the next few days, Salim moved through his routine as if nothing had changed. He still worked. He still woke early. He still carried loads, delivered packages, and spoke little. But inside, something had shifted. He made the necessary calls quietly, confirming the win through official channels, ensuring that the money would be secured safely. Each step felt unreal, like walking through a dream that had not yet decided if it would last. He told no one, not his roommates, not his co-workers, not even the friends who had stood beside him through difficult days. This was not something he could share yet. Instead, he began preparing for his journey home. He bought simple clothes, nothing expensive, nothing that would draw attention. He chose a few items, carefully fabric his mother would appreciate, small tools his father could use, things that carried thought rather than value. He avoided anything that would reveal what had happened, because this was not about showing wealth. It was about restoring what had been missing. On his last night in Nairobi, Salim sat alone in his room after his roommates had fallen asleep. The city outside hummed softly, distant and familiar. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to sit without thinking about survival. He allowed himself to imagine. He saw his parents sitting outside their home, not tired, not worn down but at ease. He saw his mother laughing again, her voice light and unburdened. He saw his father standing tall, not weighed down by years of quiet struggle. He saw himself there with them, not as someone who had escaped alone, but as someone who had returned to lift what mattered most. A small, quiet smile touched his face. It did not feel like a dream. It felt possible. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Salim began his journey. The bus was crowded, filled with people carrying bags, children's stories, and silence. He found a seat by the window, his small bag resting at his feet, his hands steady in his lap. As the city slowly faded behind him, replaced by open land and long roads, he felt something growing inside him. Not fear, not doubt, something steadier, hope. The farther they traveled, the more familiar the landscape became. The roads narrowed, the air changed, the noise softened, and with every mile, his heart moved closer to the place he had never truly left. He did not know what he would find. He did not know what had changed. He did not know that the life he imagined was already gone. But as the village came into view, quiet and still under the afternoon sun, Salim leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching, his breath calm. He was coming home. And he believed with everything he had that this time he was bringing something that would finally make things right. By the time Salim stepped off the bus, the sun had already begun to lean toward the late afternoon, casting long shadows across the dusty road that led into the village. The air felt different here, quieter, slower, familiar in a way that wrapped around him like something he had almost forgotten how to hold. For a moment he stood still. He took in the sight of the narrow path, the scattered houses, the distant sound of goats bleating somewhere beyond the trees. Everything looked the same, and yet something felt wrong in a way he could not immediately name. He adjusted the small bag on his shoulder and began walking. People noticed him, not loudly, not openly, but in the subtle ways that villages always notice. A woman paused mid-conversation. A young boy slowed his steps and stared. Two men standing near a well turned slightly, their voices dropping into something softer, less certain. Salim offered small nods as he passed. Some nodded back, others did not. The closer he got to his parents' home, the heavier the silence became. It was not empty silence. It was filled with something unspoken, something that seemed to move ahead of him, warning others before he even arrived. A faint unease settled in his chest. Still, he kept walking. He turned the final bend that led to the family compound, his steps slowing without his permission. And then he stopped. The house was not empty. Smoke rose from the cooking area. Voices came from inside, unfamiliar voices. For a second, his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. He stood there staring at the doorway that had once belonged to his parents, his thoughts scrambling to make sense of something that did not fit any memory he had carried with him. He took a step forward, then another. A woman emerged from the house holding a pot, speaking casually to someone inside as if she had always lived there. She did not recognize Salim. She did not greet him. She simply glanced at him, the way one looks at a stranger passing by. Salim's throat tightened. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but low. "Where are Baba Juma and Mama Zawadi?" The woman paused. For a brief moment, something flickered across her face. Not surprise, not confusion, but something closer to discomfort. She shifted her weight slightly. "They are around," she replied vaguely, avoiding his eyes. Salim did not move. Where, he asked again. This time she did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned her head slightly as if hoping someone else might respond for her. But no one came forward. "They are not here," she said finally. The words landed with a quiet force. Salim felt it in his chest, in the space between breaths. "Not here," he repeated. She nodded, already stepping back, already retreating into the house, as if the conversation itself was something she did not want to hold. They moved, she added quickly before disappearing inside. Moved. The word echoed in Salim's mind, hollow and incomplete. His parents would not leave without telling him. Not like this. Not without a reason. He turned slowly, scanning the compound, searching for something that made sense. But everything felt slightly out of place, as if reality had shifted just enough to break the pattern he remembered. A voice called from behind him. Salim. He turned. An older man stood a short distance away, his posture hesitant, his eyes carrying a weight that did not belong to a simple greeting. It was Mzee Otieno, a neighbor who had known Salim since childhood. Salim stepped toward him quickly. Mzee, where are my parents? He asked. The old man did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around as if making sure no one else was listening. His gaze moved toward the house, then back to Salim, his expression tightening. Come, he said quietly. Salim followed without question. They walked past the main compound, moving behind the familiar structures toward an area that Salim rarely visited as a child. The ground became rougher, the air heavier with the smell of animals and neglect. With each step, Salim's unease grew stronger. Then he saw it. A broken structure, barely standing its wooden frame, leaning unevenly against time and weather. The roof sagged, patched with old materials that could not fully cover what lay beneath. The smell reached him, first sharp, heavy, unmistakable. A cowshed. Salim stopped walking. No, he whispered. Mzee Otieno did not speak. He simply nodded once slowly. Salim's heart began to pound, not fast, but hard, each beat pressing against his ribs with growing force. He took a step forward, then another, his body moving, even as his mind resisted. And then he saw them. Mama Zawadi sat on the ground, her back resting against the rough wooden wall, her body wrapped in a faded cloth that no longer held its color. Her head was slightly bowed, her hands resting weakly in her lap. Beside her, Baba Juma lay on a thin layer of old sacks, his frame smaller than Salim remembered his shoulders, no longer carrying the quiet strength that had once defined him. For a moment, Salim could not breathe. Everything inside him seemed to stop. The world narrowed to that single image, his parents reduced to something that felt less than human, surrounded by animals, by dirt, by a life that spoke not just of poverty but of abandonment. Mama, he said, his voice breaking before the word could fully form. Mama Zawadi lifted her head slowly. Her eyes found his, and in that instant something passed between them. Recognition, disbelief, and something deeper that could not be spoken. Salim, she whispered. He moved toward her quickly, dropping his bag without thinking, kneeling beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for her. Her skin felt cold, too light, as if something had been taken from her piece by piece over time. What is this? He asked, his voice no longer steady. What happened? Baba Juma turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Salim's with a quiet, heavy gaze. But he did not answer. Instead, he looked away. That hurt more than anything. Salim looked between them, his chest tightening, his thoughts, racing, anger rising in a way he could not contain. Who did this? He demanded. Mama Zawadi shook her head weakly. Please, not now, she said softly. Not now, Salim repeated, disbelief cutting through his voice. You are living here, like this, and you say not now. Her eyes filled with something close to fear. Lower your voice, she whispered urgently. Salim froze. It was not the request that stopped him. It was the fear behind it. The kind of fear that does not come from a single moment but from something that has been repeated, reinforced, made real over time. He looked around, slowly, noticing now the small details he had missed. Before, the way the area was slightly hidden, the way no one had followed them, the way the village itself seemed to keep its distance from this place. This was not an accident. This was not temporary. This was something that had been allowed to happen, something that had been seen and ignored. Salim's anger did not disappear. It changed. It sank deeper, becoming something colder, sharper, more dangerous. He turned back to his parents, his voice quieter now but heavier. "I came to take you home," he said. Baba Juma closed his eyes briefly. "This is home now," he replied, his voice low, almost empty. The words hit harder than anything else. Salim shook his head slowly. "No," he said, but even as he spoke, he understood something he had not expected. This was bigger than a house, bigger than money. Something had been taken from his parents that could not be restored with comfort alone. Something had been broken, and whatever had done this was still close. Watching. Waiting. Salim looked back toward the main house, where strangers now lived as if nothing had happened. Then he looked at the cowshed again, at his parents, at the truth standing in front of him. And for the first time since he had won the lottery, Salim felt something stronger than hope. He felt purpose sharpen into something unyielding. He did not speak again, but inside him, something had already begun. Salim did not sleep that night. The village grew quiet in the way only a place familiar with silence could. The distant sounds of animals settled into a low rhythm, and the wind moved gently through the dry grass, brushing against the broken walls of the cowshed where his parents lay. But inside Salim, nothing was quiet. He sat just outside the structure, his back against a rough wooden post, his eyes fixed on the dark outline of the house that used to belong to his family. Their house, now occupied by strangers who laughed, cooked and moved freely under a roof that had once sheltered his parents. The anger inside him rose again, but this time it did not burn wildly. It settled into something colder, more focused. A kind of anger that did not rush but waited. Behind him, Mama Zawadi shifted slightly in her sleep, a soft sound escaping her lips as if even rest could not fully free her from discomfort. Salim turned immediately, his attention drawn back to the two people who mattered more than anything else. He stood and stepped inside the cowshed. The smell hit him again, but he no longer reacted to it. He knelt beside his mother and adjusted the thin cloth around her shoulders. Then he looked at Baba Juma, whose eyes were open, staring quietly into the darkness. "You should rest," Salim said softly. Baba Juma did not respond right away. Instead, he watched his son for a long moment, as if trying to understand something beyond what was visible. "You came back," he said finally. "Yes," Salim replied. Another pause. Why now? The question was simple, but it carried weight. Not suspicion, not accusation, just a quiet search for truth. Salim hesitated. He could not tell them yet. "Not like this. I wanted to see you," he said carefully. "I wanted to bring something better." Baba Juma's gaze did not shift. "There is always something better coming," he said quietly. "It just does not always arrive." The words settled between them, heavy with experience. Salim lowered his eyes for a moment, then lifted them again, more certain. "This time it will," he said. Baba Juma did not argue, but neither did he agree. Instead, he closed his eyes slowly, as if the conversation itself had taken more strength than he could spare. Salim remained there for a while, listening to their breathing, watching the slow rise and fall of their chests, making sure they were still there, still real, still within reach. Then he stepped outside again. The house stood in the distance. Quiet now, its lights dimmed, but even in darkness it felt occupied, claimed wrong. Salim stared at it, his jaw tightening. He needed answers, and he would not get them by waiting. At first light, the village began to stir. Women swept the ground outside their homes. Children moved in small groups, their voices soft but growing louder as the day woke up around them. Men gathered in familiar places, speaking in low tones that shifted when Salim passed by. He noticed everything: the way conversations stopped, the way eyes avoided his, the way silence followed him like something alive. This was not normal. This was not just discomfort. This was fear. Salim walked toward the center of the village where people usually gathered near a small open space shaded by a large tree. It was a place where news spread, where decisions were discussed, where truth and lies often blended until they looked the same. Today, it felt different. He approached a group of men standing together. "Good morning," he said. A few responded quietly, others did not. Salim stood there for a moment, then spoke again. "I am looking for answers," he said. "About my parents." No one moved. One man shifted his weight. Another looked down at the ground. Finally, a voice spoke. "You should ask your family." The man said, his tone careful. "My family," Salim repeated. A slight hesitation. "Your uncle," the man clarified. Salim felt something tighten in his chest. "Omari?" he asked. The man nodded once. "He knows what happened." Salim held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for something more. Truth, clarity, anything that could break through the tension hanging in the air. But nothing came. Only silence. He turned and walked away. Omari. The name sat heavily in his mind. His father's younger brother. A man who had always carried himself with a certain confidence, a certain ease that did not quite match the effort required to earn it. Growing up, Salim had not questioned it. Family was family, but now something did not feel right. Salim made his way toward the house again, this time with a different purpose. The path felt shorter, sharper, as if each step carried more weight than before. When he reached the compound, the same woman from the day before was outside washing utensils. She looked up as he approached. "You again," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "I want to see—" Omari, Salim said. She hesitated. "He is inside." Salim did not wait for permission. He stepped past her and entered the house. The interior was familiar but altered. Small changes, different arrangements, new objects placed where old ones used to be. It felt like walking through a memory that had been rewritten without his consent. Omari sat at a wooden table, eating calmly as if nothing in the world had shifted. He looked up. For a brief moment, surprise crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "Salim," he said, leaning back slightly. "You have returned." Salim stood still. "Yes." A pause. Omari gestured loosely toward a chair. "Sit." Salim did not move. "I will stand," he replied. Omari's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression remained composed. "As you wish." Silence stretched between them, filled with everything that had not yet been said. Salim spoke first. "My parents are living in a cowshed." Omari nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a simple fact. "Yes." The calmness of the response sent a sharp edge through Salim's restraint. "Why?" he asked. Omari set his spoon down carefully. "There were complications," he said. "The land, the house. Your father could no longer manage things properly." Salim's hands clenched at his sides. "So you took it," he said. Omari's expression hardened slightly. "I did what was necessary, for who Salim demanded. For the family," Omari replied. The words hung in the air, hollow and controlled. Salim stepped forward slightly. "They are your family," he said, his voice low but steady. "And you left them to live with animals." Omari's gaze did not waver. "They are alive," he said. "That is more than some can say." The coldness of it struck deeper than anger. For a moment, Salim said nothing. He simply looked at the man in front of him, searching for something remorsed out, even discomfort. There was none, only calculation, only certainty, and something else. Confidence. As if Omari believed there was nothing Salim could do. That realization settled into Salim's chest like a stone. This was not just greed. This was something planned, something protected, something that had been allowed to happen without challenge. Salim took a slow breath. "This is not finished," he said quietly. Omari leaned back again, a faint, almost dismissive smile touching his lips. "It already is," he replied. Salim held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked out. Behind him, the house remained still. But inside him, something had shifted completely. This was no longer confusion, no longer shock. This was the beginning of something else. Something that would not end quietly. Salim stepped back into the sunlight, his eyes moving toward the direction of the cowshed where his parents waited. And for the first time he understood clearly. Whatever had been done to them was not just an act of cruelty. It was a system, and systems did not break easily, but they could break. Salim left the compound without looking back, but the conversation with Omari did not leave him. It followed him like a shadow, repeating every word, every pause, every cold glance that had revealed more than it tried to hide. "They are alive. That is more than some can say." The sentence stayed with him heavy and disturbing, not because it was true, but because of how easily it had been said. As if survival alone was enough, as if dignity no longer mattered, as if his parents had been reduced to something less than human. By the time Salim returned to the cowshed, the sun had climbed higher and the heat had begun to settle over the village like a quiet pressure. Mama Zawadi was awake, sitting upright now, her back against the wall, her breathing still uneven, but stronger than the night before. Baba Juma sat nearby, silent as always, his eyes focused somewhere beyond the space in front of him. They both looked up when Salim approached. "You went to see him," Baba Juma said. It was not a question. Salim nodded. "Yes." Mama Zawadi lowered her eyes slightly, her fingers tightening around the edge of her cloth. "You should not have gone alone," she said softly. Salim crouched down in front of them, his expression steady, though something deeper moved behind his eyes. "I needed to hear him speak," he replied. "I needed to understand what he believes." "And now you do?" Baba Juma asked. Salim paused. "Yes," he said finally. "He believes nothing can touch him." Baba Juma gave a faint, almost invisible nod. "That is why he is dangerous." The simplicity of the statement carried more truth than any long explanation could. Salim sat back slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze moving between his parents. For a moment he did not speak. He simply looked at them, truly looked, noticing the details that pain had carved over time. The thinness of his father's arms, the quiet tremor in his mother's hands, the way both of them carried themselves smaller than before, as if trying not to take up space. It was not just hardship, it was something deeper, humiliation. Salim exhaled slowly. "Tell me everything," he said. Mama Zawadi hesitated. Her eyes shifted toward Baba Juma, as if seeking permission, or perhaps strength. Baba Juma remained still for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Let him hear it," he said quietly. Mama Zawadi drew in a breath. "It did not happen all at once," she began. "At first it was small things, questions, visits. Omari would come often asking about the land, about the papers, about how we were managing." Salim listened carefully, his attention fixed on her every word. He said he wanted to help. She continued, that things were changing, that the land might become important. He spoke of development, of roads, of people coming from outside. We did not understand everything, but we trusted him. Salim's jaw tightened slightly. "Why wouldn't you?" he said. She gave a faint, sad smile. "He is family." The words landed softly, but they carried a weight that pressed deeper than anger. At first it seemed harmless, she went on. "He brought people. They spoke of documents, of registration, of making things official. They said it would protect us. Salim's eyes darkened. And you signed, Mama Zawadi shook her head. I cannot read, she said quietly. Your father. He trusted what was being said. Salim turned to Baba Juma. His father did not look away this time. They told me it was for protection, Baba Juma said. That it would keep the land safe. That without it, we could lose everything. Salim felt something cold move through him. And after that he asked. Mama Zawadi's voice softened further. After that, things changed. She paused as if the memory itself carried weight. Omari began to speak differently, not as someone helping, but as someone deciding. He said the land was no longer only ours, that arrangements had been made, that we needed to move to make space. Salim's hands clenched again. And you refused. Baba Juma nodded. Yes. What happened then? Silence stretched for a moment. Then Mama Zawadi spoke again. They did not force us. At first, she said. They waited. They spoke to others in the village. They told stories. That your father was confused. That he did not understand what he had agreed to. Salim closed his eyes briefly. They turned people against you, he said. Yes, she whispered. And when that was not enough, Baba Juma added quietly. They made it difficult to stay. Salim opened his eyes. What do you mean? Baba Juma's gaze shifted toward the ground. Supplies stopped coming, he said. People who used to help no longer did. Water became harder to access. Small things at first, then larger. Mama Zawadi nodded. They made it so staying felt like suffering, she said, so that leaving would feel like relief. Salim's chest tightened. And the village, he asked. They saw this. They saw, Baba Juma replied, and said nothing. The statement was not bitter, it was simply true. Salim let out a slow breath, his mind moving through the pieces, fitting them together into something clearer, something more structured. This was not just an act of cruelty. It was strategy, isolation, pressure, manipulation. And, the chief Salim asked. Mama Zawadi hesitated again. He knows, she said, but Salim pressed. She lowered her voice. He is not alone in his decisions. Salim understood. There were others, people with influence, people with interest, people who stood to gain from what had been done. A system. Just as he had begun to suspect. Salim leaned back slightly, his thoughts sharpening. This was bigger than family. Bigger than one man. That meant it would not be easy. But it also meant something else. It could not be hidden forever. He looked at his parents again. You should not be here, he said quietly. Mama Zawadi gave a small, tired smile. Where else would we go? Salim did not answer immediately, because he knew something they did not, something he had been holding back, but he still was not ready to reveal it. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of fabric, placing it gently beside his mother. I brought this for you, he said. She looked at it surprised. You should not have spent money, she murmured. Salim shook his head. It is nothing, he said, but to him it was everything. It was a promise, a beginning. Baba Juma watched him quietly. You are thinking, he said. Salim nodded. Yes. Be careful, his father added. Thinking can lead to action, and action has consequences. Salim met his gaze. So does silence, he replied. The words hung between them, not as defiance, but as truth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Baba Juma gave a slow nod, a small one, but enough. Salim stood up, his body, steady, his mind clearer than it had been since he arrived. He looked once more toward the main house, then back at the village beyond, at the people, at the silence, at the fear, and something inside him settled into place. This was no longer just about bringing comfort. It was about restoring something that had been taken in plain sight, something that required more than money, more than anger. It required patience, understanding, and the right moment. Salim took a slow breath, then another, and as he stood there between the past and what was coming next, one thing became certain. He would not rush, he would not break, and he would not stop. Salim did not confront anyone the next day. Instead, he watched. The village woke, as it always did, slowly, with the soft sweep of brooms against dusty ground, the distant call of livestock, and the quiet murmur of conversations that never seemed to rise above a certain level. Life continued as if nothing had happened, as if two elderly people had not been pushed out of their own home and left to live in a collapsing cowshed. That was the first thing Salim understood clearly. This was not chaos, it was order, a kind of order built on silence. He moved through the village without urgency, greeting people politely, asking simple questions that did not immediately reveal his intent. He did not mention the cowshed, he did not accuse, he listened, and people spoke. Not directly, but in fragments, in hesitation, in the spaces between what was said and what was avoided. By mid-morning, Salim had already begun to see the shape of things more clearly. Omari had not acted alone. That much was certain. There were names that came up repeatedly, though always cautiously. Men who attended meetings with the chief. People who had suddenly become more confident, more visible, more involved in decisions that once belonged to the community. Salim did not write anything down. He carried it all in his mind, carefully, patiently. By the time the sun climbed higher, he found himself near the small school at the edge of the village. The building was simple, its walls worn, but standing, its yard filled with children whose laughter cut through the heaviness that seemed to rest everywhere else. He paused there for a moment, watching, listening. A voice behind him broke the stillness. "You are Salim, aren't you?" He turned. A young woman stood a few steps away, holding a stack of worn exercise books against her chest. Her posture was straight, her eyes clear, but there was something cautious in the way she studied him. "Yes," Salim replied. "And you are Achieng," she said. "I teach here." Salim nodded slightly. "I remember you," he said after a moment. "You were younger then." A faint smile touched her lips. "And you were not always this quiet," she replied. For a brief second, something almost light passed between them. Then it faded. Her expression shifted. "You went to see your parents," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." A pause. "And you saw where they are staying?" "Yes." She exhaled slowly, her grip tightening slightly on the books she held. "I tried," she said quietly. Salim looked at her. "Tried what to speak," she answered. "When it began, when things were still, unclear." Salim's attention sharpened. What happened? Achieng glanced toward the school building as if making sure no one was close enough to hear. "They said I was interfering," she said. "That I did not understand village matters, that I should focus on teaching children and not questioning elders." "And you stopped?" Salim asked. She met his gaze directly. "I was made to stop," she said. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. Salim nodded slowly. "That means you saw enough to know something was wrong," he said. "Yes. Then tell me." Achieng hesitated, not out of fear, but out of caution. "This is not simple," she said. "What happened to your parents is not just about family. There are people involved who have influence beyond this village." Salim did not look away. "I am listening." She studied him for a moment longer, then seemed to make a decision. "There have been rumors for months," she said, "about a road, a major one. It is supposed to pass near this area. If it happens, land prices will rise. People who own land here will become important." Salim felt something click into place. "And Omari knew this," he said. "Yes," Achieng replied. "Before most people did." Salim's jaw tightened slightly, so he moved early. He wasn't the only one, she added. Salim's eyes narrowed. Who else? Achieng shook her head slightly. I don't have names, she said. Not clearly, but I know there were meetings. Not in the open, not with everyone. Only certain people were invited. Salim let the information settle. And the chief? He asked. Achieng's expression grew more guarded. The chief does not act alone, she said again, echoing what Mama Zawadi had said the day before. Silence followed, not empty, but full of understanding. Salim shifted his weight slightly, his thoughts moving quickly now, connecting pieces that had once felt separate. This was planned, he said quietly. Achieng nodded. Yes, and my parents were in the way. Yes, the simplicity of it made it more brutal. Salim looked toward the schoolyard again, where children were still laughing, still playing, still untouched by the kind of decisions that shaped the lives of those around them. Then he spoke again. I need proof, he said. Achieng gave a small, almost sad smile. That is where it becomes difficult. Difficult is not impossible, Salim replied. She studied him again more carefully this time. You have changed, she said. Salim did not respond immediately. Life does that, he said finally. Achieng nodded slowly. Yes, it does. Another voice interrupted them. Teacher. Ayah. A young boy ran toward Achieng, holding a torn piece of paper, his face urgent with some small problem that mattered greatly to him. She turned to him instinctively, kneeling slightly to meet him at eye level, her attention shifting fully in that moment. Salim watched quietly. The world was still moving. Even here, even now. When the boy ran back toward the others, Achieng stood again. I cannot do this openly, she said. But I can help you understand where to look. Salim nodded. That is enough. She hesitated, then added one more thing. There is someone else, she said. Baraka. He works near the road with motorcycles. He hears things, more than most. Salim stored the name immediately. Where can I find him? Near the junction past the market, she said. He is careful. You will need to be as well. Salim gave a small nod. I understand. A moment passed. Then Achieng stepped back slightly, creating distance again as if returning to the role she needed to play in public. Be careful, Salim, she said quietly. He met her gaze. I will, he replied. But inside, he knew something else. Careful did not mean passive. Careful meant precise. He turned and began walking toward the direction she had indicated. The village felt different now, not quieter, but clearer. The silence was no longer confusing. It was intentional, and intention could be understood. And once it was understood, it could be broken. As Salim walked, the name echoed in his mind. Baraka, another piece, another path, another step closer to the truth. And somewhere beneath it all, something steady continued to grow. Not anger, not fear, something sharper, control. By the time Salim reached the junction, Achieng had described the sun was already high, pressing down with a heat that made the air shimmer above the dusty road. The market nearby buzzed with its usual rhythm voices, bargaining metal clinking the distant hum of movement that carried on, regardless of anything happening beneath the surface. But Salim did not go into the market. He stayed at the edge, watching. A line of motorcycles stood near a shaded area, their riders resting, talking in low voices, waiting for the next passenger, the next small earning. Among them, one man sat slightly apart, leaning against his bike. His posture relaxed, but his eyes alert in a way that did not match the calmness of his body. Salim knew immediately. That was Baraka. He walked toward him slowly, not too direct, not too hesitant, just enough to signal intention without drawing attention. Baraka noticed him before he spoke. You are looking for someone, Baraka said, his voice neutral. Salim stopped a few steps away. I am looking for you. A faint smile touched Baraka's lips, but it did not reach his eyes. "Then you have found me," he replied. A short silence followed, filled with quiet observation. Baraka looked Salim over carefully, as if measuring not just who he was, but what he carried with him. "Achieng sent you," Baraka said after a moment. "Yes." Another pause. "That means this is not a simple conversation." "It is not." Baraka nodded slowly. "Then we should not have it here." He stood pushing himself off the motorcycle and gestured subtly toward a path that led away from the main road, behind a row of small storage sheds. Salim followed without question. They walked in silence until the noise of the market faded into something distant. Baraka stopped in a shaded area where the ground was uneven, but quiet enough to speak without interruption. "What do you want to know?" Baraka asked. Salim did not hesitate. Everything he said. Baraka let out a short breath. "That is a large request. Then start with what matters most." Baraka studied him again, more deeply this time. "You came back for your parents," he said. "Yes. And now you see what has been done." "Yes." Baraka nodded. "Then you already know this is not just about a house." "I do," good Baraka replied. "Because if you thought it was, you would already have lost." Salim's expression did not change. "Tell me what I am dealing with," he said. Baraka shifted his stance slightly, his gaze moving briefly toward the direction of the road, as if checking for movement out of habit. "There have been meetings," he said. "Not in the village, outside, with people who do not belong here." Salim listened closely. "What kind of people?" "Men with plans," Baraka said. "Men who see land as numbers, not homes." Salim's jaw tightened. "And Omari is working with them." "Yes." How Baraka gave a small, humorless smile. "By being useful," he said. "He knows the land, he knows the people, he knows who can be convinced and who needs to be pushed." Salim absorbed the words. "And my parents," Baraka's expression shifted slightly. "They were not easy to move," he said. "Your father refused at first. He argued, he questioned. That made things inconvenient. So they applied pressure," Salim said. Baraka nodded. Slowly, he replied. "Carefully. They made it look natural, like decline, like age, like your parents could no longer manage what they had." Salim felt the familiar coldness settle deeper. "And the documents altered," Baraka said simply. "Not completely false. Just enough truth mixed in to make the lies believable." Salim exhaled slowly. "That means there is a trail." Baraka looked at him, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "but not an easy one to follow. I am not looking for easy." Another brief silence passed. Then Baraka spoke again. "There is something else," he said. Salim waited. "The road project," Baraka continued. "It is not official yet, but it will be. When it is announced, everything changes. Land that means nothing today will mean everything tomorrow. And Omari is positioning himself for that," Salim said. "Yes, and he is not alone." "No." Salim nodded slowly, his thoughts aligning more clearly with each piece of information. This was not random. This was timing, preparation, execution, and the chief Salim asked. Baraka's expression hardened slightly. "He is involved," he said. "But not openly. He keeps distance, enough to deny, not enough to stop anything." Salim understood. Protection. Layers. Baraka shifted his weight again. "You should be careful," he said. "People who dig into this do not always get what they expect." Salim met his gaze. "I am not expecting anything," he said. "I am preparing." Baraka held his eyes for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Then you need proof," he said. "Yes. There are papers," Baraka continued. "Records that passed through the local office. Copies may exist. Not here. In town." Salim's focus sharpened. Where Baraka hesitated slightly, then spoke. "A registry office near the district center," he said. "But access is not simple. People there know who to trust. Salim took that in. I will find a way. Baraka studied him again. You speak like someone who has options, he said. Salim did not answer directly. I have reasons, he replied. Baraka gave a faint nod, accepting the response without pressing further. Then start there, he said. Follow the papers. If you can prove the transfer was manipulated, everything changes. And if I cannot, Salim asked. Baraka's expression remained steady. Then nothing changes, he said. The honesty of it was sharp. Salim let the silence sit for a moment, then nodded. I understand. Baraka stepped back slightly, signaling that the conversation was nearing its end. One more thing, he added. Salim looked at him. Do not move too fast, Baraka said. They are watching, even when it feels like they are not. Salim thought of the village, of the silence, of the eyes that avoided him. Yes, he said quietly. I have noticed. Baraka gave a small approving nod. Good, he said. They stood there for a moment longer, two men bound not by friendship but by a shared understanding of something that could not be spoken openly. Then Salim turned and began walking back. The path felt different now, not uncertain, defined. He knew where to go next. He knew what he needed. Proof, not anger, not confrontation, not yet. As he reached the edge of the market again, the noise returned, filling the space around him, blending with the heat, the movement, the ordinary life that continued without interruption. But inside him, everything had shifted again. This was no longer just about understanding. It was about action, careful, measured, and inevitable. Yet as he moved through the crowd, something pulled at his thoughts. A quiet, persistent unease. Not about Omari, not about the chief, not even about the system he was beginning to uncover. Something closer, something fragile. His parents. He had left them alone, in that place, in that condition. The thought tightened in his chest. He quickened his steps. By the time he reached the cowshed, the sun had begun to lower slightly, casting longer shadows across the ground. He stepped inside quickly. Mama, he called softly. No response. His heart skipped. He moved closer. Mama Zawadi lay on her side, her breathing shallow, uneven, in a way that did not match the slow rhythm of rest. Mama, he said again, louder this time. Still no answer. Baba Juma was beside her, his face tense, his usual quiet, replaced by something closer to fear. She has been like this, he said, his voice low but strained. Since you left. Salim dropped to his knees, immediately reaching for his mother's hand. It felt colder than before. Too cold. What happened? He asked urgently. I do not know, Baba Juma replied. She was speaking, then she stopped. Salim's mind moved quickly, now faster than before, sharper than before. This was no longer about patience, no longer about waiting. This was immediate. We need to take her to a hospital, he said. Baba Juma hesitated. With what money, he asked. The question cut through everything. For a moment, Salim said nothing. Then he made a decision. Not careful, not hidden. Necessary. I will handle it, he said firmly. He stood already moving, already preparing. For the first time since his return, something shifted completely. The line between secrecy and action had been crossed, and there was no going back. Salim did not waste another second. The moment he saw the way his mother's chest rose and fell, too shallow, too irregular, something inside him shifted from patience into urgency. Every careful plan he had been building, every step he had intended to take, suddenly felt secondary. Nothing mattered more than this. Mama, can you hear me? He said, his voice low but firm, as he gently shook her shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, but they did not open. Salim's throat tightened. We are taking her now, he said, already reaching for his bag. Baba Juma remained still for a moment, his eyes fixed on Mama Zawadi's face as if trying to will her back into strength. Then slowly, he nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. But there was hesitation in his voice. Not because he disagreed, because he understood the cost. Salim noticed it immediately. "We don't have time to think about that," he said sharper than before. "We move now." Baba Juma did not argue again. Instead, he carefully slid his arms beneath Mama Zawadi's shoulders, lifting her gently while Salim supported her legs. Her body felt lighter than it should have, fragile, in a way that made Salim's chest tighten even more. They carried her out of the cowshed, into the open light. For a brief moment, the village seemed to pause. People noticed, they always did. But as before, no one stepped forward. No one asked questions. No one offered help. Salim did not look at them. He did not need to. He already understood. He moved quickly toward the main path, his steps steady despite the urgency pressing through him. "We need transport," he said. "There is none close," Baba Juma replied. "We would have to walk." No, Salim cut in. His voice was calm now. Too calm. "I will find something." He adjusted his grip and turned toward the road that led out of the village. Each step felt heavier, not because of the weight in his arms, but because of what he was beginning to accept. He could not hide anymore, not completely. Not when time mattered like this. As they reached the junction near the market, Salim spotted the motorcycles again. The same group of riders stood nearby, their conversations slowing as they noticed what was happening. Baraka saw him immediately. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. "What happened?" he asked. "My mother," Salim replied. "She needs a hospital. Now." Baraka did not ask more questions. He turned, kicked his motorcycle into motion, and brought it forward. "Help me," he said. Within seconds, they adjusted positions, carefully placing Mama Zawadi between Salim and Baba Juma, securing her as best as they could. Salim climbed on behind her, his arms wrapped protectively around her fragile frame. "Hold her steady," Baraka said. "I will," Salim replied. Then they moved. The road stretched ahead, rough and uneven, dust rising behind them as the motorcycle cut through the heat of the afternoon. The wind pressed against Salim's face, but he barely felt it. His focus remained entirely on the small, weakening body in his arms. "Mama, stay with me," he murmured. Her head rested against his chest, unmoving. Time blurred. The journey felt longer than it should have, each second stretching under the weight of uncertainty. Baba Juma rode close behind on another motorcycle, his eyes never leaving them, his expression tight with something he rarely allowed to surface: fear. When they finally reached the town, Salim did not wait for direction. "The hospital," he said. Baraka nodded and accelerated. Minutes later, they arrived. Salim jumped off before the motorcycle had fully stopped, lifting his mother into his arms again and rushing toward the entrance. "Help!" he called out. A nurse looked up, startled by the urgency in his voice. "What is wrong? She is not breathing properly," Salim said. "She needs help now." The nurse moved quickly, signaling to others. Within moments, Mama Zawadi was placed on a stretcher and taken inside. Salim followed closely, his heart pounding, his thoughts racing in every direction at once. "Sir, you need to wait here," someone said. He stopped, reluctantly. His eyes remained fixed on the door as it closed behind them. The hallway felt too quiet, too still. Baba Juma arrived moments later, his steps slower but his presence steady. He stood beside Salim without speaking, his hands clasped tightly together. They waited. Minutes passed, then more, each one heavier than the last. Finally, a doctor emerged. Salim stepped forward immediately. "How is she?" he asked. The doctor looked at him, his expression serious but controlled. "She is weak," he said, Very weak, severe exhaustion, dehydration, and signs of long-term neglect. How long has she been like this? Salim hesitated. Too long, he said quietly. The doctor nodded. We are stabilizing her, he continued. But she needs proper care. Not just today. Ongoing treatment, nutrition, rest. Salim felt a mix of relief and tension. Will she recover? He asked. If she receives the care she needs, the doctor replied. The answer was not certain, but it was enough. Do whatever is necessary, Salim said firmly. The doctor studied him briefly. There will be costs, he said. Salim did not hesitate this time. I will pay. The words came easily, too easily, and for the first time someone noticed. The doctor's expression shifted slightly. Very well, he said. We will proceed. He turned and walked away. Salim exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing just enough to let him breathe again. Baba Juma looked at him. You said you would handle it, he said. Yes, with what his father asked. The question was quiet, but direct. Salim met his gaze. For now. Trust me, he said. Baba Juma held his eyes for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. I have always trusted you, he replied. The words settled deeply. Salim looked away, briefly. His thoughts shifting again, moving back to everything he had learned, everything he had seen. This was no longer just about survival. This was about what came next. Hours later, when Mama Zawadi was stable, Salim was finally allowed to see her. She lay on a hospital bed, her breathing steadier, now her face calmer, though still marked by the exhaustion of everything she had endured. Salim stepped closer, his movements slower now. Mama, he said softly. Her eyes opened slightly. She looked at him. A faint recognition passed through them. You came back, she whispered. I did, he replied. A small, weak smile touched her lips. You should not worry so much, she said. Salim felt something tighten in his chest. I will worry enough for both of us, he said. She closed her eyes again, her breathing even. For a moment, everything felt still. Then Salim stepped back, his mind already moving ahead. He turned toward Baba Juma, who stood quietly near the door. She will not go back there, Salim said. Baba Juma did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at his son carefully. No, he said finally. She will not. Salim nodded. The decision was made, and with it something else became clear. The time for silence was ending, because now it was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about protecting what remained, and preparing for what was coming next. The hospital room carried a quiet that felt different from the village. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of waiting, of healing, of something fragile being held together by effort and care. Mama Zawadi slept for most of the night, her breathing steadier, now supported by medication and the watchful attention of nurses who moved in and out of the room with practiced calm. Baba Juma remained close, sitting on a hard chair beside her bed, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes rarely leaving her face. Salim did not leave. He stood by the window at first, watching the faint glow of town lights outside, his thoughts moving quietly but constantly. Everything that had happened in the past 2 days had shifted the ground beneath him. The village was no longer a place of memory. It had become something else, something layered, controlled and dangerous in ways he had not fully understood before. But now he did, and now he could not step away. By morning, the doctor returned with updates. She is responding well, he said. But recovery will take time. She cannot return to the same conditions. She won't, Salim replied immediately. The doctor gave a brief nod. Then you will need to arrange proper accommodation, he added. And continued care. I will. Again, the answer came without hesitation. This time, Baba Juma noticed more clearly. When the doctor left, he turned to Salim, his gaze thoughtful, searching. "You speak as if everything is already decided," he said. Salim looked at him. "In some ways it is," he replied. "With what means?" Baba Juma asked. The question returned, but now it could not be avoided much longer. Salim stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "I have resources," he said carefully. "More than before." Baba Juma did not react immediately. He simply watched his son, how he asked. Salim hesitated for a brief moment. Then he chose a path that revealed enough, but not everything. "I was fortunate," he said. Something changed. Baba Juma held his gaze. "Fortune does not come without reason," he replied. Salim allowed a small, restrained smile. "Sometimes it does," he said. Silence followed, not tense, but full. Finally, Baba Juma nodded once. "Then use it well," he said. "I will." That was enough, for now. Later that morning, Salim stepped outside the hospital, the brightness of the day meeting him with a sharp contrast to the stillness inside. The town moved as usual. People walking, vehicles passing life, continuing without pause. But Salim no longer saw it the same way. He saw movement, connections, possibilities. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts he had barely used before. The past few days had forced him into a different position, one where decisions could be made faster, where solutions did not need to wait. He made a call. "Hello," a voice answered. "I need a place," Salim said. Quiet, clean, close to the hospital. There was a pause on the other end. "For how long?" "As long as necessary." Another pause. "That will cost. I will cover it," Salim interrupted calmly. The tone shifted immediately. "I understand," the voice replied. "Give me an hour." Salim ended the call. He stood there for a moment, the phone still in his hand, feeling the difference clearly now. Before, everything required negotiation. Now it required decision. But he did not allow himself to become careless. Money was a tool, not the solution. He returned inside. By midday, arrangements had been made. A small but clean house near the hospital was secured, furnished simply but comfortably. It was not luxury, but it was far beyond anything his parents had experienced in years. When Salim told Baba Juma, his father listened quietly. "We will move her when the doctor allows," Salim said. Baba Juma nodded. "You have done well," he said. Salim did not respond, because this was not enough. Not yet. That afternoon, after ensuring everything was stable, Salim stepped out again. This time his purpose was different. He was no longer just reacting. He was moving forward. He found a quiet place near the hospital grounds and made another call. This one was more deliberate. "Good afternoon," a professional voice answered. "I need legal assistance," Salim said. "What kind? A land dispute," he replied, with evidence of manipulation. The tone shifted slightly. "Are you currently involved in a case?" "Not yet." A brief pause. "Where are you located?" Salim gave the details. "I can arrange a meeting," the voice said, "but I will need more information." "You will have it," Salim replied. Another pause. "Then tomorrow morning." "Good." The call ended. Salim lowered the phone. Slowly, his thoughts steady. This was the next step. Not confrontation, not anger, structure, proof, process. He could not fight what he had seen with emotion alone. He needed something stronger, something that could stand in the open and not be denied. By evening, Salim returned to the hospital room. Mama Zawadi was awake. Her eyes followed him as he entered, and this time there was more awareness in them. "You have been moving a lot," she said softly. Salim smiled slightly. "A little." She studied him. "You are planning something." It was not a question. Salim pulled a chair closer and sat beside her. "I am making sure you do not go back to that place," he said. Her expression softened. "That is enough for me," she replied. But Salim shook his head gently. "No," he said, "it is not enough." She watched him quietly. "What more do you want?" she asked. Salim paused. Then he spoke. "I want what was taken to be returned," he said. The room fell into a deeper silence. Baba Juma looked up. "That will not be easy," he said. "I know. It may not be safe. I know." Another pause. Then Baba Juma asked the question that mattered most. "Will you stop if it becomes dangerous?" Salim met his gaze. "No," he said. The honesty of it settled heavily in the room. Mama Zawadi closed her eyes briefly. "You are your father's son," she murmured. Salim let out a quiet breath. "Then you know I will not turn away," he replied. Neither of them argued, because they knew. Later that night, as the hospital grew quiet again, Salim stood by the window once more. But this time his thoughts were not scattered. They were aligned. He had a place for his parents. He had medical care secured. He had a legal path beginning. And he had something else. Time. Not endless, but enough. Enough to move carefully. Enough to build something that could not be easily broken. He looked out into the darkness, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. The man staring back at him was not the same one who had boarded the bus days ago. Something had changed, not just in his circumstances, in him. And as he stood there, one truth became clear. This was no longer just a return home. It was a fight, one that would not be rushed, one that would not be lost easily. By the next morning, the village had already begun to talk. News traveled fast in places where silence was usually louder than truth. Salim's sudden return, his mother's removal from the cowshed, and the quiet movement between the village and the town hospital had not gone unnoticed. But what confused people most was not what he had done. It was how he had done it. No one had seen him struggle to gather money. No one had heard him beg for help. No one had witnessed the kind of desperation that usually accompanied such decisions. Instead, he had acted quickly, calmly, and that unsettled people. By midday, word had reached Omari. He sat in the same house he had claimed, listening as one of his associates spoke in low tones. "They took her to the hospital," the man said. "In town." Omari leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "With what money?" he asked. The man hesitated. "No one knows." Omari's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "People are talking," the man continued. "They say Salim has changed." Omari gave a faint dismissive smile. "Everyone changes when they leave the village," he replied. "It means nothing." But even as he spoke, something had begun to shift beneath his confidence, because uncertainty was something he did not tolerate well. "Keep watching," he added. "I want to know where he is staying, who he is speaking to, everything." The man nodded and left. Omari remained seated for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. Then he stood. If Salim had become unpredictable, then he needed to be understood. Back in town, Salim arrived at the small legal office just before the agreed time. The building was modest but well kept, its structure simple but firm. Inside, the air felt different, organized, controlled, purposeful, in a way that contrasted sharply with the chaos hidden beneath the village's quiet surface. A receptionist looked up. "You have an appointment?" "Yes," Salim replied. "For a consultation." She nodded and gestured toward a door. "Go in." Salim stepped inside. A man in his late 40s sat behind a desk, his posture straight, his expression neutral but attentive. Papers were neatly arranged in front of him, and his eyes carried the kind of awareness that came from years of listening to problems that rarely had simple solutions. "Sit," the lawyer said. Salim did. "What is the situation?" the man asked. Salim did not rush. He explained everything carefully. The land, the documents, the pressure applied to his parents, the forced removal, the silence of the village, the involvement of his uncle, and the suspicion of a larger plan tied to future development. The lawyer listened without interruption. When Salim finished, the room remained quiet for a moment. Then the lawyer leaned back slightly. "What you are describing," he said, "is not uncommon." Salim's expression did not change. "That does not make it acceptable," he replied. The lawyer gave a small nod. "No, it does not," he agreed. He tapped his fingers lightly on the desk. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet." "Then that is the first problem," the lawyer said. "Without documentation, this becomes a matter of claims, and claims can be dismissed." Salim expected that. "There are records," he said, "at the district office." The lawyer studied him. "And you believe they will support your case?" "I believe they were altered," Salim replied, "but not perfectly." A brief pause. "That means you are looking for inconsistencies," the lawyer said. "Yes." The man nodded slowly. "That is possible," he said, "but not simple. If others are involved, those records may be protected." Salim leaned forward slightly. "What do we need to begin?" The lawyer's eyes sharpened just a bit. "Access," he said, "and time." Salim nodded. "You will have both." The lawyer held his gaze. "And the cost?" he asked. Salim did not hesitate. "I will handle it." Again, that shift. The lawyer noticed it. "You are confident," he said. "I am prepared," Salim replied. A small silence followed. Then the lawyer gave a short nod. "Very well," he said. "We begin with the records. I will request access. You will accompany me." When Salim asked, soon the lawyer replied, "But understand this, if we move too quickly, we alert those involved." Salim leaned back slightly. "I am not here to rush," he said. "I am here to finish." The lawyer allowed a faint, almost approving expression. "Good," he said. "Then we proceed carefully." Back in the village, tension had begun to take shape. People spoke more now, though still quietly. The absence of Mama Zawadi and the visible movement of Salim had disrupted something. Not openly, not dramatically, but enough to create a shift in the atmosphere. By late afternoon, a community gathering was called. It was not unusual, but this time it carried a different weight. Salim arrived just as people were beginning to gather under the large tree at the center of the village. Men stood in small groups. Women sat slightly apart, and the chief positioned himself where he could see everything without appearing to dominate. Omari was there. Of course he was. He stood among a group of men, his posture relaxed, his expression calm, as if nothing had changed. Salim walked forward. Conversations softened. Eyes turned. The silence returned, but not the same silence as before. This one carried expectation. Omari spoke first. "You have been busy," he said, his tone light. Salim did not smile. "I have been necessary," he replied. A few heads turned slightly at that. Omari's expression tightened just a fraction. "You take your mother to town," he continued, "without informing anyone, without consulting the family." Salim stepped closer. "My parents do not need permission to receive care," he said. The words landed clearly. The chief shifted slightly in his seat. "This is a matter that concerns the community," he said carefully. Salim turned his attention to him. "Then the community should explain why 2 elders were left in a cowshed," he replied. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not loud, but real. Omari's tone hardened. "You speak with emotion," he said. "But you do not understand the situation." Salim held his gaze. "Then explain it," he said. A pause. Omari glanced briefly toward the chief, then back at Salim. "Your father agreed to certain arrangements," he said. "The land is no longer solely his." Salim's voice remained steady. "Under what conditions?" "Legal ones," Omari replied. "Then present them," Salim said. The tension sharpened. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Salim continued. "I am requesting a formal hearing," he said. "Before the chief, before the elders, before everyone." A stir moved through the gathering. This was no longer quiet, no longer contained. Omari's eyes narrowed. "And what do you expect to prove?" he asked. "The truth," Salim replied. The simplicity of it carried weight. The chief shifted again, clearly aware that the situation was moving beyond control. "This is not something to be decided quickly," he said. Salim nodded. "I agree," he said. "Set a date." Another pause. The village watched, waited. Finally, the chief spoke. "There will be a hearing," he said, "in due time." Salim did not push further. He did not need to. The line had been drawn. Publicly, clearly, irreversibly. He stepped back. The crowd began to shift again. Conversations rising. Voices carrying more uncertainty than before. Omari remained still for a moment longer. Then he spoke quietly, just enough for Salim to hear. "You are making a mistake," he said. Salim met his gaze. "No," he replied. "I am correcting one." They held each other's eyes for a moment. Then Salim turned and walked away. Behind him, the village no longer felt the same. Because now the silence had been broken. And once broken, it could not be restored so easily. The days that followed the gathering did not explode into chaos. They tightened, like a rope, pulled slowly from both ends, drawing everything inward, increasing pressure, without noise. The village did not argue openly, but it no longer pretended nothing had happened. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations lowered, but did not disappear. People began choosing where they stood, even if they did not say it out loud. And for the first time, Omari was no longer completely comfortable. Salim noticed it, not in obvious ways. Omari still walked through the village with his usual confidence, still spoke with measured authority, still carried himself like a man in control. But beneath that surface, there were cracks, small, almost invisible, but present. He was watching more closely, listening more carefully, reacting faster. That meant something had shifted, and Salim knew why. Because now this was no longer a private matter. It had become public. Back in town, the legal process had begun. Salim sat across from the lawyer once again, this time with a stack of documents laid out between them. The air in the room felt sharper than before, filled with focus rather than uncertainty. "These are the initial records," the lawyer said, "what we were able to access without raising attention." Salim leaned forward, studying the papers carefully. Names, dates, signatures, transfers. At first glance, everything looked legitimate, clean, orderly. But Salim had already learned something important. The truth did not always hide in what was visible. It hid in what did not fit. "This signature," he said, pointing to one of the documents. "This is my father's." "Yes," the lawyer replied. Salim frowned slightly. "It looks correct," he said. "It is correct," the lawyer confirmed, "but that does not mean it was given under proper understanding." Salim nodded slowly. "Continue." The lawyer turned to another page. "This is where it becomes questionable," he said. "The timeline." Salim followed his finger. The dates were close. Too close. "What does that mean?" Salim asked. "It means the process moved faster than it should have," the lawyer explained. "Too fast for proper review, too fast for informed consent." Salim's expression hardened slightly. "So, they rushed it." "Yes, and the witnesses." The lawyer tapped another section. "Here," he said. "These names." Salim read them. Some he recognized, others he did not. "Are they reliable?" he asked. The lawyer gave a slight pause. "They are." "Connected," he said. Salim understood. "Not neutral, not independent. Part of the system." "This is not enough," Salim said. "No, The lawyer agreed. But it is a start. Salim leaned back slightly, his thoughts moving quickly. We need more, he said. Yes. Something stronger. Yes. Silence followed for a moment. Then the lawyer spoke again. There is one more possibility, he said. Salim looked at him. The original drafts, the lawyer continued. Before final submission. If we can find those, we may be able to show what was changed. Salim's focus sharpened. Where would they be? The lawyer hesitated slightly. In the same office, he said. But not in the open records. Then how do we access them? The lawyer studied him carefully. That depends, he said, on how far you are willing to go. Salim did not look away. As far as necessary. The lawyer nodded slowly. Then we proceed. Carefully, he said. Back in the village, the pressure was building in quieter ways. Achieng noticed it first. Students came to school, distracted whispering about the upcoming hearing about Salim, about Omari. Even the children felt it, though. They did not fully understand what it meant. She watched them closely, and she watched the adults even more. That afternoon, she walked toward the edge of the village where she knew Salim had returned briefly to check on matters before going back to town. She found him near the old path, standing alone, his posture still but his mind clearly elsewhere. You are moving quickly, she said. Salim turned. Not quickly enough, he replied. Achieng stepped closer. People are talking, she said, more than before. That was the point, Salim said. Yes, she agreed. But talking can become something else. Fear, Salim asked. Or resistance, she said. Salim considered that. Which one do you see? Achieng paused. Both, she said. That answer mattered, because fear could silence, but resistance could change things. Salim nodded slightly. Good, he said. Achieng studied him. You sound certain, she said. I am focused, he replied. She hesitated, then spoke again. There is something you should know, she said. Salim waited. One of the names on those documents, she continued. A witness. He has been asking questions. Salim's attention sharpened. What kind of questions about whether his name will be mentioned, she said. About what will happen if things go wrong. Salim felt a shift. Where is he? He lives near the outer farms, she said, but he does not speak openly. He will, Salim said quietly. Achieng looked at him. How Salim did not answer immediately. Because the truth was, he was not entirely sure yet, but he understood something important. Pressure worked both ways. If Omari could use it to control, then it could be used to break that control. I will find him, Salim said. Achieng nodded. Be careful, she said again. Salim gave a faint, almost knowing look. I always am. But inside, something was shifting again. This was no longer just about gathering evidence. It was about people, their fear, their choices, their limits. Back in town that evening, Salim sat alone for a moment, reviewing everything. The documents, the names, the timeline, the witness, the system. Piece by piece, the structure was becoming visible. And with visibility came opportunity. He reached into his bag and pulled out his phone again. This time he did not hesitate. He made another call. Yes, he said when the line connected. I need access to something that is not meant to be seen. There was a pause on the other end. That will be difficult, the voice replied. I am aware. And expensive. Salim's expression did not change. I am prepared. Another pause. Then I will see what can be done. The call ended. Salim lowered the phone slowly. For a moment he sat in silence. Then he stood. Because now the direction was clear. The truth was not far. It was just protected, and protection could be broken, carefully, precisely, inevitably. As he looked out into the night, one realization settled fully into place. The system that had removed his parents from their home was beginning to feel pressure, and systems under pressure. Eventually, crack. The morning of the hearing arrived without announcement. No drum, no formal summons carried from house to house. And yet everyone knew. The air itself seemed to hold the message, passing it quietly from one person to another, until the entire village moved with the same unspoken understanding. Today, something would be decided. Salim arrived early. He walked into the open space beneath the large tree where gatherings were always held. His steps measured, his expression calm. But inside, everything was sharpened, every thought, every memory, every piece of truth he had collected over the past days. He did not come alone. Beside him walked the lawyer, dressed simply, but with a presence that did not belong to the village. It drew attention immediately. Heads turned, voices lowered. This was new. This was different. Across the clearing, Omari stood already surrounded by a few men who carried themselves with quiet authority. He noticed Salim at once, his gaze shifting briefly to the man beside him. That was the first crack. Not fear, but recognition. The chief arrived shortly after taking his place with deliberate composure. The elders followed, forming a loose circle that gave the gathering its shape, its structure, its sense of order. People gathered around them, standing, sitting, watching, waiting. When the murmur settled, the chief spoke. "This matter has been brought before the community," he said. "It concerns land, family, and agreement. We will hear both sides." His tone was controlled, balanced, but beneath it there was something else. Caution. Salim stepped forward. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood where everyone could see him. "My parents were removed from their home," he said, "and placed in a cowshed. That is not an agreement. That is not a misunderstanding. That is an action." A ripple moved through the crowd. Omari stepped forward in response. "You speak as if you were here," he said. "But you were not. You do not know what was discussed, what was agreed." Salim did not look away. "Then explain it," he said. Omari gestured slightly. "Your father agreed to transfer part of the land," he said. "It was necessary. There were opportunities. Developments coming. It was a decision made for the future." Salim's voice remained steady. "Then why are they not living in that future?" he asked. A brief silence followed. Not loud, but heavy. Omari's expression tightened. "They chose to step aside," he said. "That is not true," Salim replied. The words landed cleanly, directly. The chief raised a hand slightly. "Let there be order," he said. Salim nodded. Then he stepped aside slightly and gestured toward the lawyer. "This is my representative," he said. "We will present what we have found." The presence of the lawyer shifted the atmosphere again. This was no longer only a village matter. It had structure now. The lawyer stepped forward, calmly. "We have reviewed the documents related to the land transfer," he said. "On the surface they appear valid, but there are inconsistencies." He held up a set of papers. "The timeline is compressed beyond standard procedure," he continued. "Signatures were obtained in a sequence that suggests pressure, not understanding. Witnesses are not independent." The murmurs grew louder. Omari's voice cut through them. "These are accusations," he said, "not proof." The lawyer nodded. "That is correct," he said, "which is why we looked further." Salim felt the moment tighten. This was where things would shift, or fail. The lawyer reached into his folder and pulled out another document. "This," he said, "is a preliminary draft of the transfer. It differs from the final version." The crowd leaned in. Even the chief's posture changed slightly. "What difference?" he asked. The lawyer held the document up. "In this version, the land remains under shared control," he said. In the final version that control is removed. A stir moved through the gathering. Omari stepped forward quickly. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. The lawyer did not answer immediately. Instead, he placed the document in front of the chief. "Review it," he said. The chief took it, his expression tightening as he scanned the contents. "This could be fabricated," Omari said sharply. Salim spoke then. "Then let the witnesses speak," he said. All eyes turned. This was the moment that had been building quietly beneath everything. The witnesses, names on paper, voices not yet heard. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, a man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His posture was uncertain. His eyes avoided direct contact. Salim recognized him from the documents. One of the witnesses. The man hesitated, then spoke. "I was there," he said. The crowd fell silent. Omari's gaze sharpened. "Be careful what you say," he warned. The man swallowed. "I was told what to say," he continued. "I did not understand everything. I was told it was already agreed." A ripple spread, not loud, but undeniable. Omari stepped forward again. "You are confused," he said. The man shook his head. "No," he replied. "I am afraid." The honesty of it struck deeper than anything else, because it revealed what had been hidden beneath everything. Fear. Salim did not interrupt. He did not push. He let it unfold. Another voice came, then another. Small pieces, not perfect, not complete, but enough. Enough to show a pattern, enough to reveal pressure, enough to break the illusion of agreement. The chief looked down at the documents again, then up at Omari. "This requires further review," he said. Omari's composure slipped slightly. "This is being manipulated," he said. Salim stepped forward one last time. "No," he said quietly. "This is being revealed." The two men stood facing each other, not as family, not anymore, but as opposing forces. Around them, the village watched. Not silently now, but actively, thinking, choosing. The hearing was not finished, not yet. But something had already happened. The truth, once buried beneath silence and control, had begun to surface, and once seen, it could not be unseen. The clearing did not return to silence after the first witness spoke. It fractured, not into chaos, but into something more unstable. Voices rising in uncertain layers, questions forming faster than answers could contain them. People shifted where they stood. Some moved closer, others stepped back. The balance that had once held the village in quiet agreement had begun to tilt. The chief raised his hand again, but this time it took longer for the gathering to settle. "Order," he said, his voice firmer now. Gradually the noise softened, but it did not disappear. It lingered beneath the surface, alive, restless. Salim stood still, his eyes moving across the crowd. He could see it clearly now, the change. Not complete, not decisive, but real. The silence that had protected Omari was no longer intact, and Omari knew it. He stepped forward again, but this time the confidence in his posture was edged with something sharper. "This is being turned into something it is not," he said. "A misunderstanding is being made to look like a crime." Salim did not respond immediately, because this moment did not belong to words spoken too quickly. It belonged to what came next. The lawyer stepped forward again, his tone measured. If this were only a misunderstanding, he said, there would be no need for altered drafts, pressured signatures, and compromised witnesses. Omari turned to him sharply. "You are an outsider," he said. "You do not understand how things are done here." The lawyer did not flinch. "I understand documents," he replied, "and these do not align." The chief looked between them. "Enough," he said. "We will hear all sides." He turned toward the crowd. "If there is more to say, it will be said now." The invitation hung in the air. Heavy, risky, For a moment, no one moved. Then from the back, a woman's voice broke through. "I will speak." Heads turned. A Chiang stepped forward. Her posture was steady, but her expression carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. "I warned them," she said, "when this began." The words landed clearly. "I said the process was too fast," she continued, "that the explanations were unclear, that Baba Juma did not understand what he was being asked to agree to." Omari's jaw tightened. "You were told to stay out of matters beyond your place," he said. Chiang did not back down, and I did, she replied, until now. A murmur moved through the crowd again. Not just reaction, recognition, because her voice carried something others felt but had not yet expressed. The chief's gaze shifted toward her. "You have evidence?" he asked. Chiang shook her head slightly. "I have truth," she said. The answer was not legal, but it mattered, because truth, when spoken in the open, had a way of changing things. Omari stepped forward again, his patience thinning. "This is becoming emotional," he said. "We are losing focus." Salim moved then. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with intention. "We are finding focus," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried further now, because people were listening. He turned slightly, addressing not just Omari but the entire gathering. "This is not only about documents," he said. "It is about what was done, how it was done, and who was made to suffer because of it." His eyes moved across the faces around him. They were not moved with respect, he continued. They were pushed, isolated, broken down until leaving felt like the only option. The words did not accuse, they described, and that made them harder to deny. The chief looked down briefly, then back up. "This is serious," he said. "Yes," Salim replied. Another pause. Then the lawyer stepped forward one final time. "There is one more matter," he said. Salim felt it. This was the final turn. The lawyer reached into his folder and produced another document. "This," he said, "is a communication between parties involved in the development project." The words shifted the entire space. Omari's eyes sharpened instantly. "What project?" someone asked from the crowd. The lawyer held the paper steady. "A proposed road expansion," he said. "One that will significantly increase the value of surrounding land." The murmurs rose again, louder this time, because now the motive was clear. Not just control, profit. Salim spoke. "This was not about helping my parents," he said. "It was about removing them before the land became valuable." The connection settled heavily. The pieces aligned. Omari stepped forward, his voice sharper now. "That project is not confirmed," he said. "It means nothing. It means everything," Salim replied. The two men stood facing each other again. But this time the space between them had changed. It was no longer controlled by silence. It was filled with awareness. The chief looked at the document carefully, then at Omari, then at the crowd. "This changes the matter," he said. Omari's composure finally cracked. "You are allowing speculation to decide ownership," he said. "This is dangerous." The chief did not respond immediately. Instead, he stood, slowly, deliberately, and that alone shifted everything, because when he spoke next, it would not be as a participant, but as a decision-maker. "This land transfer will be suspended," he said. The words cut through the air. Clear, final. Gasps followed. Not loud, but unmistakable. "Further investigation will be conducted," the chief continued. "Until then, no party will claim full control." Omari stepped forward. "You cannot—" "I can," the chief interrupted. The authority in his voice was no longer cautious. It was firm, because now the situation had moved beyond quiet agreements. It had become visible, and visibility demanded response. Salim did not move. He did not celebrate, because he understood something important. This was not the end, but it was a break, a fracture in the system, and once something cracks, it cannot return to what it was. Omari stood still, his expression no longer calm, no longer controlled. For the first time, there was something else in his eyes. Not fear, but the beginning of it. Salim met his gaze, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with certainty. This was not over, but it had begun, and now it would continue in the open, where truth could no longer be buried. The village did not return to what it had been. Even before any final decision was written or enforced, something deeper had already changed. The air no longer carried the same quiet obedience. Conversations were no longer buried as quickly. People looked at one another differently, not openly defiant, not fully united, but no longer completely silent. Truth had entered the space, and truth once seen could not be easily ignored. Salim stood at the edge of the clearing, long after the gathering had begun to disperse. He watched as people drifted away in small groups, their voices low but active, their expressions thoughtful, unsettled, uncertain. No one celebrated. Because this was not a victory yet. It was a shift. Behind him, the lawyer stepped closer. "This will move forward," now he said quietly. "Officially." Salim nodded. "I understand. There will be resistance." The lawyer continued. "People do not give up control easily." Salim's gaze remained fixed ahead. "I am not expecting them to," he said. The lawyer studied him for a moment. "You have done something important today," he said, "but it comes with consequences." Salim finally turned slightly. "I am ready for them," he replied. The lawyer gave a small nod. "Good," he said. "Then we continue." He left shortly after returning to town to begin the formal process that would take what had been spoken and turn it into something that could not be denied. Salim remained, because his work here was not finished. Not yet. He walked slowly through the village, no longer avoiding the eyes that met his. Some people nodded now, others still looked away. But the difference was clear. He was no longer invisible. He reached the compound. The house stood as it had before, but it no longer felt the same. The certainty that had once surrounded it had been shaken. Omari stood outside, waiting. Salim approached without hesitation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Omari broke the silence. "You think this is over?" he asked. Salim shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I think it has just started." Omari's expression hardened. "You have made this public," he said. "That was a mistake." Salim met his gaze. "No," he replied. Silence was the mistake. A brief pause. Omari stepped closer. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said. Salim did not step back. "I know enough," he answered. Omari's eyes narrowed. "This land will change," he said. "You cannot stop that." "I am not trying to stop change," Salim replied. "I am correcting how it happens." The difference was clear, and it unsettled Omari more than anger would have. "You were not here," Omari said again. "You do not understand what it took to position things." Salim's voice remained calm. "And you do not understand what it cost," he said. The words landed heavier than before, because now they were not just emotional, they were visible, proven. For a moment, Omari said nothing. Then he turned slightly, his gaze moving toward the house, as if measuring something beyond the moment. "This will not end cleanly," he said. Salim nodded once. "It already hasn't," he replied. They stood there a moment longer. Then Salim turned and walked away. Not in retreat, but in completion. Because that conversation no longer mattered. What mattered now was what came next. Back in town, Mama Zawadi had begun to recover. It was slow, careful, but real. She sat by the window of the small house Salim had arranged, wrapped in clean fabric, her breathing steady, her eyes clearer than they had been in days. Baba Juma sat nearby, watching her with the same quiet presence he had always carried. But now something else had returned. Strength, not the physical kind, the kind that comes from being seen again. Salim entered quietly. Mama Zawadi looked up and smiled faintly. "You have been busy," she said. Salim smiled back, a little. She studied him. "You are doing more than you are saying," she added. Salim sat beside her. "I am doing what is needed," he replied. She nodded slowly. "That is what your father always did," she said. Salim glanced at Baba Juma. "And you?" he asked. She smiled gently. I made sure he did not forget why she said. A quiet moment passed between them. Then Baba Juma spoke. "What will happen now?" he asked. Salim leaned back slightly. "The land is under review," he said. "No one controls it fully." And after that, his father asked. Salim paused. "After that, it will be returned," he said. Baba Juma held his gaze. "You sound certain." Salim nodded. "I am." There was no arrogance in his voice, only clarity. Mama Zawadi reached out, placing her hand over his. "You came back," she said softly. "That is enough." Salim shook his head gently. "No," he said. "It is not enough." She looked at him. "What more do you want?" Salim's voice lowered slightly. "I want you to live without fear," he said, "without being pushed aside, without being made to feel small." Her eyes softened. "That is a big thing," she said. "Yes," Salim replied. "And you believe it can be done?" Salim looked at both of them. "Yes." Silence followed, but this time it was not heavy. It was full of something that had been missing before. Possibility. Days passed. The investigation moved forward. Documents were reviewed. Witnesses were questioned. Details that had once been hidden became visible. And slowly, the structure that had supported the injustice began to weaken. Not collapse, not yet, but weaken. The final decision came quietly. No large gathering, no dramatic announcement, just a formal declaration. The land transfer was invalid. The house was to be returned. Ownership restored. When Salim read the document, he did not react immediately. He simply held it in his hands, feeling the weight of something that had taken more than effort to reach. Then he folded it carefully and went home. The house was cleaned, repaired, restored, not to its old state, but to something better, not larger, not extravagant, but dignified. When Mama Zawadi stepped inside for the first time again, she paused. Her eyes moved slowly across the space. Then she sat down, not out of weakness, but because she needed a moment to understand that it was real. Baba Juma stood beside her, silent but present. Salim watched them both, and for the first time since his return, something inside him settled completely. Not the fight, not the process, but the purpose. It had been met. Not perfectly, not easily, but truly, and that was enough. Sometimes people believe that poverty is the deepest pain a person can experience, but this story reminds us that there is something even heavier than lack of money. It is the loss of dignity. It is being seen and then ignored. It is being pushed aside in a place where you once belonged. Salim did not just fight to reclaim land. He fought to restore something invisible but essential, the right of his parents to live with respect, to be treated as human beings, not obstacles. And in doing so, he revealed something powerful. That silence allows injustice to grow, but even one voice, when steady and unafraid, can begin to break it. Not instantly, not easily, but inevitably. If this story touched you, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it in your country right now? And if you believe in stories about justice, healing, and hope,
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the stories we tell are the ones that remind us who we are meant to be.